The 2016 election of President Donald Trump marked a watershed moment, not just for the nation, but more specifically for the conservative movement. Since conservatism's rise to prominence beginning in the 1950s, the movement has been defined by certain orthodoxies: small government, strong support for military funding, and traditional values. It was the movement of William F. Buckley and Barry Goldwater. But Trump's election challenged all that. Unlike conservatism of the past, his ascendancy represented the aspirations of a populist coalition more interested in reform than in adhering to old orthodoxies. So which direction will conservatism ultimately take? According to columnist David Marcus, the debate is over. In an opinion piece published on foxnews.com, Marcus writes, quote, "The time for conservative deciding has passed. The decision has been made, and the conservative movement is now a populist, nationalist, reform party-minded body. It matters very little if our corporate liberal media chooses to accept this. It is true." Joining us now, the author of this very insightful, provocative piece, as always, Mr. David Marcus of The Federalist. Good to see you, David.
Good to see you, man.
So you say the die have been cast at this point, and the die is cast, and the new right has won. Is old conservatism dead?
Yes, I mean, to the extent that by old conservatism we mean Liz Cheney and Mitt Romney, and you know, you think about his 2012 run for the presidency. It really represents the old Republican Party that told conservative voters that they knew what was best for them, instead of asking the voters really what they wanted, which is what Trump did. And the reason I put Reform Party in there is that if you go back to the Reform Party of the 1990s, and of course Donald Trump ran on the Reform Party ticket for president briefly in the year 2000, it was very populist. It was very suspicious of trade deals. It was very suspicious of foreign entanglements. It was very suspicious of immigration. And then you had another figure, Pat Buchanan, who was a real culture warrior. You put those forces together, you have something that looks a lot like the new right.
In your piece, you identify a coalition, what you actually call a periodic table of the elements of the new right. It includes border hawks, the anti-media Catholics, anti-identitarians, the fringe, and the torchbearers. Take us through, I mean, I'm sure this is the beginning of what will be a very excellent book, David, down the line, but take us through in shorthand form what these groups are, how they play together, and what they mean.
Yeah, so I mean, the border hawks are sort of what I just described. I mean, the central premise of Trump's presidency was build the wall, and it had not only to do with the wall with Mexico, but not getting embroiled in bad trade deals, trying to build things in the United States. The anti-media is outlets like The Federalist, The Daily Wire, The Post-Millennial, people like you, people like Tucker Carlson, who believe that the mainstream media is consistently lying, and who try to expose those lies.
Yeah.
The Catholics represent a sort of common good approach to conservatism that's less worried about small government and more worried about making sure that toddlers aren't being entertained in public libraries by drag queens. The anti-identitarians are anti-critical race theory, all of those sort of identity issues that we have. The fringe is a tricky one because that's some people in right-wing media who haven't always been accepted by the mainstream, who I argue should be, because I think they play an important role. And finally, the torchbearers are the politicians, the people like DeSantis, the people like Cruz, who are going to carry this message forward in the halls of power.
What does this new right want? I mean, you talked about all these different factions that have the specific goals in mind that are their primary motivator, let's say. But overall, when you put them all together, what does this new coalition of the right, if it is able to achieve electoral victories in the midterms and then in the next presidential, what are they trying to do for the country?
Ultimately, I think it's primarily cultural. I mean, I think that what led to Trump's rise and what led people to finally have enough and say that they would try a new form of conservatism is seeing what's happening in the schools, seeing situations where, trans children, maybe, involved in surgeries and medications and just in general seeing what's happening to our society. And yeah, I think that the orthodoxy of small government isn't good enough anymore. I mean, you look at big tech and the establishment, old school conservatives say, it's awful, but there's really nothing we can do. Well, I mean, that's not good enough. We can't just file a few lawsuits as the country goes to hell. They want to fight. I mean, that was the joke about Trump. He fights. They want to fight.
That's a big difference from what we've seen with the gently and in gentlemanly fashion losing GOP attitude of the past. Do you think that there's any plan here to reestablish ascendancy for what you could call, I suppose, the Bush-Cheney or the Cheneyite wing of the GOP? Is there any real hope for them? How are they going to try to wrestle back control? Because there are certainly a few elements out there that still carry that torch.
I mean, they're going to go on CNN and MSNBC, and I have to watch a lot of CNN. And, just today,
You're a brave man.
every hour, thank you, every hour in the first 5 minutes, they had a story on Liz Cheney. Why? Liz Cheney's a backbencher. Liz Cheney's probably going to lose her primary. We know the reason why, because they want to pretend that there's this civil war in the GOP that simply flat out doesn't exist. So my advice, and I hope I'm able to take it, is I had to mention all these people in order to write this piece. I don't want to mention them again. When I see these annoying tweets from the Lincoln Project or whatever, I intend to ignore them, and I would urge other people to do that as well. Let MSNBC give these people their oxygen. We don't have to do it.
What do you think are the primary nodes of political attack that we should expect from this new right that Trump really, let's just call it, it's really Trumpism, right? I mean, if we're going to define what you're talking about is essentially the Trump coalition of different groups that came together that delivered him victory in 2016. I think there was some fracturing among them, in part because of the pandemic and Fauciism, but also because some aspects of the Trump agenda were not implemented by the Trump administration, if we're being honest about what happened and what was accomplished in the first 4 years. So what does that look like going forward? How do we expect that those different groups, the anti-media, the Catholics, anti-identitarians, will have most fruitful lines of criticism against the Biden-Harris, which is really just Obama 3.0?
I mean, I think we're clearly seeing it at the border now, where so many Americans are frustrated by what they're seeing, because it's just obvious what happened. I mean, the Biden administration threw up a green light and people came. Now they're trying to turn the light yellow, maybe, but that's not working either. So, the border is going to be a big one. Again, the trade deals will be big. But just in general, I think that they're going to demand that politicians be responsive to them. The Republican voters don't want to hear about how awful Donald Trump is. And if that's the only thing that you're able to say, you're not going to get their votes.